Hey there, folks. Welcome to another episode of UI Mondays. As you can tell, today we have a wonderful guest. This is Jake, Figma developer advocate. You want to go ahead and do a quick introduction, Jake?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks so much for having me. Super excited to be here. My name's Jake Albaugh. I am a developer advocate at Figma. I have been at Figma since January of this year. I'm passionate about community, code, creativity. I have a background in design and have been doing front end for about the past 10 years. Yeah, I'm super excited about Figma, but also just code in general and all things creative about code stuff. So super stoked to be here.
Nice. I'm curious. It's something that I always kind of ask folks that have made that jump. What got you over moving from design into dev?
Yeah. It's funny. It's one of those things that you kind of like look back on, and the narrative's a little bit clearer than it felt like when you were going
Yes.
through it. One thing I realized, I've design and creativity and code have always been like fairly closely associated in my mind. And while I went to school for design and all of that, looking back, I realized that I was lucky enough to have a high school teacher that in the computer science class saw that I was kind of bored with Microsoft Front Page. And it's funny, I have this little gem from the past because I was just talking to a friend about it. But this is a book called Flash ActionScript for Designers. And so ActionScript was interactivity.
Yes.
And you could play audio. It was the way to do everything that came with HTML5 before HTML5. And my teacher in high school gave me this book and let me do my own Flash curriculum. And so that was this moment, I think, of art, creativity, code. It's all the same. And while I don't know anything about Flash anymore, all of that knowledge is totally gone. It was kind of deeply embedded. Another example I think was there's this Arcade Fire music video that came out a long time ago. That was Google Chrome. It was when Chrome was new, and they had this artist put together this interactive HTML5 music video that used Google Maps APIs and was doing wild things with pop-ups while the song was playing. And so it was this creativity, code, design, cool thing, I think was kind of always in my head. But practically the transition was kind of I got a 2-year design degree. All my friends were going to transfer to get 4-year degrees. And I was I think I'm going to just move to the city, take design clients, and learn to kind of code. I had taken enough code courses to be I feel like I could get my footing. And at that time, it was kind of a little bit of the Wild West. If you were a small business and you wanted a website, you would hire a punk like me to just build one for you and do your logo and come up with an identity,
the
style
webmaster
guide.
era.
Yeah, exactly. And so I was it was it was a great time to start doing all of this stuff because, there was no Squarespaces or Wix or anything like that. And so it's kind of you could get your feet wet and build the fact that the website existed kind of covered the fact that it wasn't done particularly well. It was still a website. So yeah, that kind of really helped for me was just kind of seeing the need for it, also needing to make money, and just kind of figuring it out as I went.
That is awesome.
I have 2 other relics. You ready for 2 relics?
Oh, please. I almost died.
HTML5 for web designers and then CSS3 for web designers.
Yes. Hold on. Somewhere I think I've got SAS for web designers.
There you go. I would say that I feel I learned programming principles with SAS, for loops and variables. Like those concepts to me came from SAS, not like JavaScript, which is so wild.
Oh no. I remember I got this, I had put this on it was like a holiday wish list. And I remember someone being like, "Are you sure? Like this, are you really, that's the gift you want?" And I was like, "Yeah, please, somebody buy it for me."
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I remember just getting so excited that like cool books existed about coding.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, I've got a whole bunch of embarrassing old textbooks over here. Nice. There's a copy of Learning Web Design.
There you go.
Which I can tell you would not help you today. But
absolutely. Yeah, I think I have like a book on PHP somewhere around here.
Yeah, when I was in high school, I took Java, which has not helped.
I feel like that would have turned me away from programming, at least where I was at in high school. Like I would have been like, "Well, this is too much."
It sounds, I think it was very similar to what you described with the teacher that was really kind, because that was very much the case where it was like, there were a few of us, I think it was like 3 or 4 of us in that quote unquote class, which was effectively like a self-study. And she just let us do whatever we wanted. And we mostly coded like text-based adventures and stuff.
That's awesome.
And then all of us tried to take the computer science AP exam and we all failed. Like I think I got an actual 1 on a scale of 1 to 5.
That's funny.
It was horrendous. You couldn't take it on the computer. You had to write out your code by hand. And I was like, I remember opening it and being like, I'm immediately going to bomb this. This is pointless.
that time was so interesting. I remember like my algebra teacher, that was another thing, was my algebra teacher was like, if you don't like memorizing this stuff, if you can program your calculator to like do it, then you can use your calculator on the test and you don't have to memorize it. And like that was an aha moment for me. I was like, okay, I'm gonna literally just copy paste from the manual into the calculator. Love to do
that. But no, that kind of, I feel you, and that it had to be that kind of practical application. And for so long for me, there was a lot of fear of like, oh, I'm not a very good math student, or I'm not very, maybe programming's not for me. And it turns out that it was fine. I could have been doing that the whole time.
Yeah, I think in my mind, I was questioning whether or not school was right for me, like in general. But yeah, that's funny. Yeah.
But I've pulled us way off topic. Sorry.
Oh, it's all good. This is great.
But brought you here to talk about Figma, which is something that we tend to get a lot of questions about, actually, because we've been on Dev by Design in the morning. We talked to a little bit of a more development-focused audience. And again, here on UI Mondays, a lot of people that watch are front-end engineers. Yep. And because I have the same kind of design background, I talk a lot about design. And I've really enjoyed kind of living in that in-between space. And people always ask, like, well, what do you use? What are you building with? Like, where do I even get started? And I usually point to Figma because that's something I've been using for years and years. But it's not something that they're familiar with, which makes all the sense in the world. So I was really kind of hoping to bring you on today and kind of give us everything, maybe not everything, what developers need to know to get going in Figma and to start leveraging Figma.
Absolutely. I'm super excited to do this. Yeah, that's great.
So maybe if you could start us off with just like, for people that have not touched it, totally unfamiliar with it, what is Figma? And oh. Are you there? Did I lose you?
I am there. I lost you for just a second, but I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Don't worry about it.
I was saying, for folks that are starting from completely nothing, what is Figma and why should developers care?
Absolutely. So I'm gonna Figma is like, personally, I have like a lot of opinions about Figma, obviously, but that's also going to be very much biased towards my individual experience with Figma, right? So at a broad level, Figma is like the first design tool that was like built for the web and like on the web, and that's like super cool because it runs in a browser, right? And as somebody who like loves web technology, like that to me was like, oh, well, that's interesting. And, maybe in a little bit, we could talk about the APIs around that. Because one cool thing is like, you can actually like run the APIs in the browser console and like manipulate your design files.
I'm going to learn a ton from this. I can already tell.
but so Figma, I think for me personally, it's design software, but it's also this like idea of multiplayer and collaboration. There's like the collaborative aspect, I think, is really cool because like having been kind of like adjacent to this industry, at least for like the past 12 years or whatever, like I've worked in environments where like there's this concept of like we build our designs here in private as individuals, and then we propose them to the team, and then we have these like harsh critiques, and then we go back into our cave and we like fix things again, and then we bring it back. Figma, like at the end of the day, is like, no, like that's goofy. Like we're in this together. It's this collaborative environment, an inclusive environment that brings all different voices into the space, puts multiple designers in a room together, and better ideas come out of that like context, right? And one of the things that I really appreciate that like, so before Figma, I was at a company based here in Chicago called Talk, and I was working primarily on the front end and did a lot of design system stuff as an engineer. And as we were kind of like developing components and these sorts of things in Figma, engineers were a part of the conversation much earlier and in the design files, right? And this thing that like you'll often run into, like especially at scale, is like you get like a handoff of a design file, and then as engineers we're like, well, you don't realize that this is actually totally going against like the direction that we've been building in, and this is going to increase, we're gonna have to push back our deadlines if we want to do this. And so much effort has gone into the design file before then that all of a sudden you find yourself in a very difficult situation. And what like I actually had 2 years of experience in was using Figma, being brought in earlier, having those conversations earlier in that cycle, a much more like collaborative learning environment around the designs, that we were building. And then your handoff, so to speak, is like much more of like a steady kind of like slow over time, like as that design eventually gets built, and whether in feature development or design systems or whatever it is. So for me, Figma encapsulates kind of this like this broad idea of collaboration when building products like together with a team, and it's very approachable. It's like web facing, right? So like there's a lot of like things that you'll find familiar from the web in kind of like Figma. But another wild thing that I didn't learn until like I started working here, but like roughly 2/3 of Figma users identify as something other than designer, right? That's a ton of people, right?
2/3.
Right.
That's surprising.
And some of those 2/3 might also be, consider themselves to be designers, right? You have a lot of designer developers and those sorts of things, but like there's a community of people that use this software that like that are more than just designers, right? And so I think that really speaks to the fact that like, yes, it's a design tool, so to speak, but like there's so much more to it than that. And so for me, that's it's been really compelling, like since I first heard about it at Talk to now as a developer advocate here. So
I think I was really enjoying what you were talking about kind of taking the process of design out from like the back room, because I think that was something that I very much felt that. And so much of my design education, whatever, more than 10 years ago, we won't talk about that, when I was in college, was this idea of like gearing up and learning to do the pitch, and like and so much of it was really like defensive, for lack of a better word, coming in.
It's a great word for it. Yeah.
Right. To come in and, well, here's what I did and here's why it's the right choice. And some of that is good and confident, and you should learn how to pitch your work and be proud of your work. But at the same time, it's not always the best attitude to come into what is effectively a partnership.
Absolutely.
And to be able to kind of have the software that helps facilitate not doing that.
Yep.
Makes all the sense in the world.
Yep, absolutely. And this isn't just like a line that I'm giving as a developer advocate. Like I literally saw this happen on a team for 2 years, like,
yeah.
And that was, that also kind of speaks to like when we were doing component development at Talk, we under the umbrella of design systems and component libraries and stuff, we had like a very rigid, fairly like heavily engineered front end with TypeScript, React, that whole thing. Figma mirrors a lot of those patterns in the design file using variants and these other things, where we were able to like, even if we weren't actually in the file earlier, we were able to like plan it as such so that we're using the exact same language. So we're talking about like a button type or a button variant or a button color, like using the same terminology, and we'll have it in our TypeScript in the exact same form that it is in the design file. And so designers who were outside of the component library conversation and engineers that were more like implementation, feature development, kind of outside of the design system sphere, they could come in and see that consistency, right? Because when they're looking at the comp, they're actually clicking on it and then seeing, okay, this button is X, Y, and Z. I literally go in my code, and IntelliSense in VS Code or whatever it is literally suggesting the exact same thing, right? That kind of consistency, while like an indirect, side effect of like working inside of Figma, I think was like very
it's a huge part of it.
Yeah. And that just streamlines all product conversations. Like, and it helps you get over like those like smaller barriers of like, well, your designers aren't thinking about interactivity, or your engineers aren't thinking about the quality of the focus state design, or, whatever it is. A lot of that stuff kind of gets sussed out because of that dynamic. So.
Yeah. So that feels like a pretty perfect lead in. Do you want to pop open Figma and maybe show us around?
Oh yeah.
Give us the tour.
Yeah. Let's, let me pop this open. I have one window today, so I'm trying to manage this here. Share screen, window, boom. Okay. So so this conversation is going to, I'm going to kind of like revolve around design systems a little bit and like component patterns, because that's, I think, what I'm most familiar with. And have, found to be the most helpful and useful. But so we have like a fairly basic button component here that's described inside of Figma. Sorry, this is going to be a little design forward at the beginning here, but essentially this is how you would make like a button component inside of Figma. And essentially what you can see is like, okay, every permutation of all of the, what we would maybe consider to be properties or states. So we have like, okay, this one here has this primary color. It's in the default state. And then we also have an active state and a hover state. Icon is false and disabled is false, right? So this is all like, your design systems team or whatever would create this language. And ideally as an engineer, like you would be participating in like the nomenclature and like how we're structuring this and how we're thinking about these things, right? But essentially we define this kind of component with this component set here of all of these, every permutation, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And then we can bring in instances of that component down here by publishing that library internally on our team. So here is a button that's based on this button, and I can resize it in any sort of comp or whatever. But I can then just switch to like, oh, here's the secondary color, the danger color, right? And if I was, a designer and I'm bringing it into like, a screen, I could, have its hover state reflected or its active state, what have you. We could add an icon to it. We can disable and so on, right? But this is now, linked to this component definition above. So if the colors ever changed or whatever, like all of this would naturally update across all the files that were implementing it, instances of it. So once you have that though, you can like, I have like a little, where is it? Here we go. So like, this might be fairly common for a lot of us developers here. Let me just quickly hide the UI. Right? So like, we're kind of drawing these associations between like, you know, your type definition for, let's say it's just like a React function component or whatever. You can use the same language. That's kind of what I was getting at earlier. And that I think is like super helpful because then, you know, any engineer that goes to implement it, you know, has all of these, you know, in TypeScript or whatever, it's just popping right up for them. You can get type validation on patterns that are reflected in your design file. And I think that's super cool. So that's kind of like the overview of like component stuff. I can also show you some API stuff too, if that would be interesting.
Yes, please. I'm personally interested in that because I have never messed with it more than I've heard a little bit about the API in terms of folks that have built Figma plugins, which I know we're going to touch on later, but I have never used the APIs as part of like a design process. So I am deeply curious.
Yeah, totally. So, all right. So at a broad level, we'll talk about plugins in a second.
Yeah, I didn't mean to like start us off.
No. I wasn't correcting you. I think this is like an important thing to understand is like what we're about to do is the code you would write in a plugin, but we're going to get there in a second. So like at the, like, if you think about it, just like as like a global variable, right? Mm-hmm. We have this Figma object, right? This is like our entry point into the entire API. And so off of this, we have like the current user. I think this will work just fine. Here's all my info. But then we also have like the current page, right? So if we look, I'm just going to hit enter for a second. But basically we have in a design file, you can have many pages inside of that file. So I have some other pages in here, but we're on the component demo page, right? So this is what Figma.currentPage is referring to. Now, when I select this node here, I can do Figma.currentPage.selection. And I'm just going to grab, that's going to be an array. And since we have something selected, the 0 position of that array is going to be present. So I can just like grab this node and let's just check like what type of node it is. So if I just do current page selection type, we see that it's an instance. And what that's an instance of is a component. So if I just rerun the same code while selecting up there, we see our component set, right? Which is this entire thing over here. And then if I select this one right here, that's going to be a component, right? And so there's a bunch of components in the component set. And then when you create an instance of a component, it allows you to, it basically is one of these little components inside of the set. My little robot vacuum might start making a ton of noise here in a second. It just beat. Okay, so so this is an instance of the component, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, but we could do all sorts of things here. So like if I select this again, I can just say .x plus equals 20, right? And I just moved it over just 20 here. Let me make it a little bit bigger so that we can see it, right? So now we just moved it over 200 points, right? So we have lots of stuff that we can then do. Let me, you know what? I think I have, let me pull up, I have a, yeah, perfect. Well, actually, let me set that X back to 0. And then we can just, at this point now say, let's just do let n equal Figma.currentPage. Let's save this little dude in a variable so that we can deselect. Okay, so then I have like a little loop function here, right? So this is, let's look at it. It's just a function where when it's called, it's going to see if n.x is less than 200. If it is less than 200, it'll set 100 milliseconds from now another, call of this function, and then we plus equal 10. So when we do loop, we could just make it kind of animate itself over, right? So we have browser functionality. Is what I'm trying to get at is like, if you can think of it in JavaScript, you don't have access to like an entire sandbox. We'll get to that in a second. But you have access to like most of what you would expect, like in the DOM, for manipulating these sorts of things, which in my mind is the coolest thing in the world. Like this is so cool. So if you want to let me pull up. So
that is incredibly cool.
Yeah.
I think a lot of what I hear, especially from some of the developer folks, is like they know what they want to do, but it's hard to manipulate the UI or learn a whole new program or whatever. And I love that this kind of just gives them a shortcut to like, grab the thing and do it with code the way you're used to doing it.
Exactly. So using the console is a really handy way to do it. There's also a super handy plugin that's out there. So I was on figma.com/developers here, but there's a scripter plugin. And scripter allows you to kind of like write these sorts of like snippets, right? And save them and manipulate them. And it's, a little bit better documented and stuff. This is a super awesome plugin if you want to like, if you don't want to like actually build an entire plugin to test out the API, this is like an awesome little way to do it inside of Figma, which is super cool. But what I was going to show you is that, let's look at the, I'm going to go to the plugin docs here. So we've got the API reference. So we were just looking at, Figma and then current page. Where's current page at? Right here, right? Here's a page node, totally documented all the stuff. So you can get at all the different things here. Here's the selection that we were just looking at. But yeah, so plugin docs, fully documented right there. I mean, we can just, so that it's like super clear, we could just do like create rectangle, right? Like we could make a rectangle in the same way we draw a rectangle using the, the GUI. If we were a designer, we could just say constrect equals this, right? And where did that appeared somewhere?
I think I saw it right above the components that.
I think it's a bad color. Hold on. There it is. I changed the background color so it blends in with the background. Anyways, so we can add a rectangle, we can change its dimensions, we can move it around, we can do all that sort of stuff. So most of what you can do inside of the UI itself, you can do using code. And I think that that's super cool. There's no you don't need to create a plugin to do it. You can do it right inside of here. But yeah, so that's I think, let me stop sharing for a second here. And pull back the other window. So that's kind of like the broad strokes, I think, of kind of like using, we're using it in the web browser right now, but there's also a desktop app that also, you can open up the developer console and run all this stuff in there too. But yeah, I feel like that's a good segue into the plugin API if we want to talk about that at all.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome.
That's one of the things that I had never thought about. Obviously, what you've just been talking about, that aspect of it being web-based, which makes all the sense in the world. And just because I've always come at it from a design side, had never stopped to think about like, of course, this is all just elements in the DOM. Of course, we can get at them.
Yep.
But one of the things kind of before that I thought was cool was like, the way that Figma's just kind of opened things up and been like, yeah, you can write a plugin, you can adjust like the software, you can tweak it and add things and really play with it in a way that we have historically very much not seen from other design software providers. Like
absolutely, yeah. We're also always evolving too. So like more functionality, like there's there's things that I can't talk about that we're, testing out. And, we're just like, we're moving as quickly as we can. And I just like, I love how much of the spirit of the web, like Figma kind of maintains.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a lot of fun. All right. So you want to talk plugins?
Let's talk plugins. Let's do it.
So plugins are like ways to run code like we were just looking at, but like to do, like much more massive things. Like let's say I wanted to, I could take like a JSON file as an input and then based on that, maybe generate every permutation of a bunch of different prop types, for a component or whatever it is. Like plugins are a way to kind of like you run a plugin inside of Figma, and that plugin can do a bunch of stuff. Like there's like an Unsplash plugin to pull in, photos from an API, right? Like you could also name your layers, and like let's say you have like components and it's like it's a card.
Bold
component.
of you to assume that I'm naming my layers. I'm glad you think so highly of me that it's not just a sea of rectangles.
The layer 1 parentheses 2.
100% chaotic evil approach to layers.
Absolutely. But like you could, like let's say you build a component and it's like a card component, and that card has an avatar image, and then it has like a first name, and then like a location. And what you could do is you could have like 20 of those, and all the layers could be like avatar, name, location, and you could just drag in some JSON into a plugin window, and it would pre-populate with all of your like placeholder data from JSON, right? Instead of having to manually enter that, it could be like, okay, for each object in this array, go through and pre-fill, right? So you can build like super handy like prototyping things. So like if you're an engineer, and like one thing I was trying to do in my last role was like see what the problems that designers were running into in Figma, like what were optimizations that could be added. And if you work at a bigger company, like a lot of bigger companies that use Figma, like have teams that like work on tooling for the design product, right? And enabling the design teams to kind of like do their job more effectively in like, you could build a plugin that's just internal for your company that has all of this internal logic built into it that doesn't need to support the rest of the world. And you can put that in a plugin. You can also create a plugin that does something like that you want the rest of the world to see, and you could publish it to our community as well. But big picture, there's essentially two places that code runs in a plugin. The first thing is on the Figma sandbox environment, like on the canvas, like creating a rectangle, moving a rectangle, changing a fill, all of these like UI actions is almost how you'd want to think about it, right? So that API is one environment. On top of that, though, oftentimes you want to do other things like fetch external JSON, or like, let's say you built a, like using the web browser, you built like an image like manipulation tool that like, I don't know, takes an image and then does a bunch of wild stuff with its pixels, using Canvas, right? And JavaScript that way. Let's say you wanted to like do that to an image that's in Figma and then get the new image and do some, and bring that in.
Right.
That's what the second environment is for. And essentially the way that works is it's an iframe and it runs web code. So you use post message to send data between the Figma environment and the iframe. And then the iframe sends data back to Figma, and then Figma can do whatever it wants with that, right? So that means you can run like, and I can show some examples.
Whatever.
Once we get into widgets, but because widgets are another thing.
So what's the difference between a plugin and a widget?
So a plugin, the biggest difference is that a plugin is run by an individual. So if I install a plugin that, let's say, goes and gets an image on the web, converts it into image bytes, and then sends it back to Figma to be used as a fill in a rectangle, right?
Yeah.
That's all my plugin does. when I run that, that's running in my session locally. And
so it's kind of like a browser extension, but just for
yeah, exactly. So like it's happening, and then the product, whatever the net result is being synchronized to everybody else in the file, because that's the thing you have to constantly remember with Figma
Right.
is it's multiplayer. So
It's
like
shared.
300 people could be in the file right now, right? There's no other code running on anyone else's machine. So plugins are basically doing all this stuff to affect the canvas. And then what happens on the canvas is then seen by everybody else. If I had like a plugin that went and got 300 images and just spit them all out in random shapes, everyone would see the net outcome of that, but it's running on just my machine. A widget provides, like, one person adds the widget, but now the widget is a UI essentially that exists on, and currently it's only in Fig Jam. So in Fig Jam, which is our whiteboard product, which is like a whole bunch of fun, you get like an actual node that has buttons in it or inputs or whatever you want, and everybody can interact with that. All 300 people can click on it, give it input, and do stuff with it. So that's the big difference, is like one is very much an individual thing, and then one is very much a multiplayer thing, because it actually exists like in the canvas itself, for everyone to play with. And I have a ton of examples of that whenever we're ready for that.
I have one more follow-up question.
Yeah.
I know anyone can create plugins, right? Anyone can create their own plugins. They can also opt to share them publicly in the community, right?
Yes.
What about widgets? Can anyone create widgets?
Yeah, anyone can create widgets. Some of the widgets that we're about to see are ones that I'm just like, are totally in development. I've yet to publish a widget to the community, but I have a bunch that I'm working on that I'm gonna show off here in a sec. But yeah, you can just build this stuff and just use it. Like, and it's well documented, like how to go through this process. But you can add development widgets, and they could just sit in your Fig Jam, and you can dev with them, play with them, and do that whole thing. So
I love that a lot. The idea that, like, if it's something that like just my company needs, it's something internal, I'm solving a problem that's super specific, I can just build something and, use it personally. But also, if I found a bigger problem that I think other people might appreciate the solution to, I can publish it. The community to me is such a cool aspect.
Yeah, and we have a customer where we ran into this one thing that they were doing that's so super cool. They had just like, as one of their rituals inside of Fig Jam, which they're using for their like whiteboarding and meetings and agendas and all that sort of thing, and their brainstorming, they like found themselves often talking about the different screens of their product. So it's like, oh, we have a checkout, we have all these different screens. And so they just had a designer like build a bunch of lo-fi mock-ups of those screens. And then they just brought that in to Fig Jam so that they could just visualize the thing that they're talking about. And it's like totally like, that has zero application outside of that context, right? But it's this super cool thing that they're using internally to help facilitate discussion. Yeah, exactly.
Right. No, I love that.
That is ultimately like, I think, the more that, developers like these are the fun little wins that you can kind of have and make big splashes internally at a company and just be like, hey, I know that we think of this as like the design world, but like actually like we love participating here and fostering like that kind of a collaborative culture. I think Figma's got like a lot of ways to get in and do that.
Yeah. Okay. But I threw you, we were going to talk, you were going to show plugins? What did I distract you from?
Oh, well, you didn't distract me from anything. Everything we've been talking about is entirely relevant. So I guess, you know what? Okay. I've got a little bit on Fig Jam, and then I can show off some Fig Jam widgets.
Yeah. All right. For folks
Yeah, go ahead.
So you talked a little bit about Fig Jam just briefly. You mentioned that it was kind of a whiteboard program. So how are people using Fig Jam? How do you, maybe recommend is a strong word, but what's the goal of Fig Jam, and how can?
I feel like I've seen Fig Jam used in so many different ways. I feel like the ultimate goal of Fig Jam is for you to do whatever you want with it, right? in that sense. But Fig Jam is a whiteboard tool that, we have. It's primarily around ideation and brainstorming. But there's this other aspect that I find really fun is like somebody who enjoys like creating small things and sharing them with other people, with code. There's this other aspect of it that like Fig Jam's like also just a ton of fun. Like I can show you some things in a second, but like, you can do kind of like more of your, Sawyer, it's got, sharing some TypeScript over here, which is like super cool for like little code snippets. I think a couple people are working on widgets that would run this code and like, so that you could like run our API inside of one of these code blocks and then it would do something, there's a bunch of prototypes out there for doing that sort of stuff. But yeah, here, let me actually just get into a widget here. So like, we've got like a ton of fun stuff. Like we can just, say that's fire. And notice how like, as I'm typing, like this is all new stuff. There's a bunch of these that are hidden in here now. And I don't even know what all of them are. Like, I think, hold on. Yeah. The more exclamation marks, that's another fun one, right? So these little like things are littered throughout Fig Jam. But this is kind of my big playground. So it's an example of like a bunch of different widgets. But we've got stickies, and oftentimes we'll have internal meetings, like maybe it's the advocacy team, which is me and some other designer advocates at Figma, and we'll brainstorm like ideas that we want to be working on, or maybe it's a retro and we're talking about things that went well, things that we could have used more support on or whatever. And we'll just like set a timer and just get going here. You can, set a timer for 5 minutes and we all just create a ton of stickies of these different things. And then we go through them. It's just like, it's what you would expect out of, a whiteboard tool. So like, here we go. And I can come in here and I could be like, yes, or I can hold this down and it gets bigger.
Big yes.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then this is a new functionality we released somewhat recently, but that stuff's stuck to this now. And we'll get into stickiness in a second. But anyway, Fig Jam is ultimately, it's for ideation, brainstorming, stand-ups, you name it. We've seen tons of people do fun stuff in here. We've got like a quarterly design team all hands, and that's a ton of people, and just everybody's cursor is in this file. Everybody's reacting, drawing glasses on pictures of people's faces. It's like, that in my mind is the spirit of Fig Jam, is just that kind of just like the inner ADHD child in me, like finds it so much easier to pay attention when I can just like doodle on a bunch of the stuff, So Fig Jam to me is much more than just a piece of software. It's also just kind of like this very collaborative, inclusive, celebratory environment. And so it's a lot more than a tool, and I've seen it used in that way. But yeah, you can build widgets for Fig Jam, and widgets are super fun. So like this right here is a widget.
Okay.
It looks kind of like a text box, right? But it's like, this is an actual widget, and this is editable text. But I'm just going to show some of this code here, and I'm going to get this timer to go away. But basically, if you've used React and if you've used function components specifically in React, the widget kind of like rendering API is going to make a lot of sense and come pretty naturally to you. So as you can see, we have like a hook. This is called UseSyncedState. We add the word synced because implicitly with widgets, you're in this multiplayer state. So like you have to keep that in mind at all times, that like anything you're building can be run by has to consider multiple people, at all times. So in this case, we're creating a state value. This is actually the code for this widget above. We get the state value of words, and then we have a setter method to set that value in the state. We have a use effect hook. And what this is doing, we'll actually come back to in just a second. But basically, we're receiving a message from post message. And we'll see when that happens in a second. And then down here, let me get rid of the UI. Down here, we have like standard kind of JSX, TSX sort of stuff. We have auto layout, which refers like auto layout is kind of our way of like aligning getting things into a row. It's almost, you could think of it almost like Flexbox in a lot of ways. Like if you're coming from like a front end perspective. But we have auto layout and padding, which is going to give us, if you see there's padding around the bordered element, right? The bordered element is like inset. That's that padding of 12. And then we have an input component, which is coming directly from the widget API. And that's what this is right here. And we can see that we have wrapping behavior. So as I type, that text is going to wrap inside of the input. The frame props are kind of like if you wanted to think of it as like the body of the input. So we have a fill of white. So we have a white background inside of this input. Then we have a stroke that's black with a stroke width of 2. And then we have internal padding of 8 and a corner radius of 8. So that's all creating this shape around this text here. So then we also have on text edit end. So this is kind of a deep dive on the input component, but basically this is the equivalent of like an on change event in HTML and JavaScript land. So when text edit has ended in this component, this callback is going to fire. And you can see here that we're getting e.characters, which is our way of grabbing the text characters from the event. And I'm trimming it to get rid of any excess white space, right? So that's like a standard string function here. And then we're setting words using our state setter up here, right? So then we're setting the state value to be that. And then if there are characters, we're going to run ShowUI, which is, remember when I was talking about how you have stuff that happens in Figma and stuff that happens in an iframe? That is what ShowUI is doing right here. And so I say HTML here. Before we get to that, the HTML is down here for a peek sees. But the value then of the input is set to the state value of words, right? So we're setting it here, and then we're saying the value of this input component is words, and then the width is 300 pixels. So all that is to say, let's see what this does. So when I hit return here is, this is the input, okay? Or the UI. So inside of an iframe, we're running some code, and we haven't gotten to that code yet. But what I'm doing is just CSS and HTML stuff. I'm doing a hue rotate CSS animation on the background and foreground, right? So we can close this and we can just say hello, right? And that's changing this value up here. So this is all sandboxed iframe HTML web API stuff. And then this is all this code stuff right here. So we could see code.tsx, that's this Figma code. And then down here is our HTML. And like, this is the code that was essentially running in there, right? It's just some basic CSS and a style block. And then we just have some HTML here. This string interpolation with $ curlies is because I'm feeding this directly into ShowUI. So basically, when I show this HTML, I'm doing it in ticks, and I'm showing your style. Like all of this code is going in as a string, but it doesn't have to. It can go in as an HTML file if you want. But I like using string interpolation for small things like this. So I'm taking the text here, which in this case would actually just be characters, right?
Mhm.
Right, so characters, I'd be feeding it in right here like this, just to see it through. And using string interpolation. But, so that's kind of like, that gives you a sense of like how the Figma code stuff works alongside the UI, but you could do other stuff. So this is another instance, but I'm doing a little bit more with, oh, and actually you're probably not gonna be able to hear this unless I unplug my headphones. But when I run this, it pops up this little smiley, right? And when I click on it, you know what? I'm gonna give it a go. I don't think this should be too problematic. I'm gonna unplug this.
Let's see what happens. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Isn't this interesting?
Okay. So you can use web APIs, right? Window.speech synthesis. I'm gonna plug this back up because we don't need to test that anymore. You can use web APIs, right? Window.speech synthesis. This is kind of like how you use the speech synthesis API. And when you click on the H1 tag, add a CSS class of animates that I can do my little simple CSS animation here. And then it will actually go ahead and synth.speak that text. But the reason I wanted to show this is, did you notice how it automatically closed when it was done speaking?
Okay.
I did, let's actually just show this again. So you're not going to hear it, but then it automatically closes at the end. That's because of this code down here. So basically I set an interval that's going to run twice per second, and it's just going to detect whether or not the synth is done speaking. So using this API on the web, they don't give you like an on speak end. So I'm just checking if it's still speaking. And then if it is, this is the important part. I'm sending a post message back to the parent that just says, hey, I'm done. And this is like, I decided for it to look like this. Type is complete. This could say whatever I wanted it to say. It could just be like, donezo, you know, like I can just say that.
Right.
But over here in my Figma code, that's where this was coming into play. So we were saying on UI message,
Gotcha.
message.type is complete, close the plugin window. So that's how you can kind of like let's say I wanted to go get some JSON when I clicked on the smiley face. I could then ship that JSON back in a post message right here, and then receive it here, and then go do something with that JSON, right? So really the sky's the limit on like what you can do like inside of this. I know like I'm not sure how much time we have here, but I do have a bunch of
as much as you want, honestly. Like we just kind of start and we go until people get bored or guess they're done. So you've got as much time as you want, man.
As long as Chad isn't super bored, I'll continue.
Keep it moving. Let's go.
Right. So I've got like, here's some other examples of things that I'm currently working on. So this actually, so we have a developer Slack, and I think after Config, which we'll talk about here shortly, which is our annual conference, I think we're going to move the developer Slack eventually over to Discord as soon as it makes sense. But we ran betas for a lot of these like widget API features. Like this input component that we've been using where I've been typing directly into the widget, that's a relatively new feature. And so I built this little to-do list to show off like a lot of the new features of widgets for our development community, which is on our plugin Slack right now. But I can just say, I don't know, do the thing, right? And hit enter. And now we've added this, and we have hover states, right?
Nice.
And I can check that off. I can uncheck it. I associated my user with this thing. And so my user's avatar is here. I can delete it, right? Do the thing. But it's also multiplayer. So like in another window right now, which you can't see, here comes Jake number 2, and I'm going to be like, another thing. And I'm going to hit enter, right? And now I've added another thing to this, and it's the same avatar for both because I have the same avatar. But this could be inline editable. This is me using input again right here to make this inline editable. So yeah, this is an example. There's another to-do list out there from Jordan Singer, one of our awesome community developers, called Lil To Do. So if you wanted to bring a to-do list, you can today without having to wait for this development widget.
If people are interested in joining the Slack, is that open or is that?
Oh, it's
only?
completely open. Yeah.
What
would be the best way to share a link there?
If you throw it to me in the private chat, I will put it in the.
Cool. Let me.
In the thing.
Handy.
And yeah, chat says you can keep going until the heat death of the universe, which sounds like a challenge to me.
Okay.
So
I'm gonna need some more water. Okay. Yeah, plug in developer Slack. Figma.
We can come back to that too, but you don't have to like.
It's public.
Okay, cool.
Am I going to Reddit right now? Friends.figma.com. It's on there. Cool. I know it's on here. Friends.
There was like a little bit of fear in your voice there. Going to
anytime
Reddit?
you're opening Reddit on the live stream, it's on. Go to friends.figma.com and it is. Here it is. Oh, well, there's Friends of Figma on Discord. Hold on. This actually might not have it. Our Discord is also open, and that's Friends of Figma. Developer Slack, I'll get to in just a second. I'll find it when I'm not sharing my screen. Okay. So another thing that I'm working on, right? So we talked about how a widget, right, is shared. Like everybody can see what I'm doing right now with this widget, right? So when I click, on join, everybody that's in this file can click on this. However, that doesn't always like, what if you wanted to build a game where people saw something unique to them, right? And it was a secret. And so that's a game that I've built many versions of this game. I'm currently working on an iteration for like as a widget. But part of the logic of this game, everyone can, like a bunch of people can join. It's not meant to be played by one person, but we're going to play with one person just for a second. And I'm not even going to bother you with the game logic. The point is, as a player, I have a secret identity. And in this case, I'm an imposter. And I have secret clues that I'm being given, and I have to like write a destination based on the clues that I've given. So I could just say like, I don't know, space. This is all secret information though. So I'm using the iframe, right? Because the iframe is relative to the user session. So shared information over here, unique local information over here. So if you're trying to think of like, what could I build with widgets or plugins? Like this is an example of like why this kind of like local thing is a super handy thing. Like if you're building game logic, for example. So I'm secretly the imposter. I'm still secretly the imposter. These were the two topics. I said space. People can vote to kill me. And then this is the last screen of the game. And then we started over. But anyways, that's an example of like why that local state is like also super important, because like it makes what you can build like also a lot cooler and depending on what you're trying to build. So that's a game example. This is a very useful widget for everybody in the world. But basically, you can search my record collection.
Got a lot of Sufjan Stevens, man.
Yeah, so we can just search for Fiona Apple. And that's going to run here in a second. All right, so here's all my Fiona Apple. We could click on this and then go back. This is just an example of like using an input. Basically, I have a public endpoint that gives JSON data for my entire record collection, and so then I just feed it in here. This is a game that I'm working on. This is a real game, and maybe some people have heard of it, called Quarto. It's basically tic-tac-toe meets chess, and a lot of fun. It's like a very complex game for being as simple as it is, and it's relatively short in terms of how long it takes to play. But basically the thinking of the game is that you have all of these pieces and there's two players. Each player is a different color. So one team's yellow, one team's like gray. And the pieces have 4 different types of traits. You have the color, the size, the shape, and the density. So density, these are the hollow, these are the solid. Color, shape, you have large and small. Shape, you have square and circle. Size, you have large and small. But basically the point is you're trying to get 4 in a row of any trait. So 4 hollow in a row, 4 small in a row. And so players take turns playing pieces on the board. And once you get 4 in a row of any trait, so right now, any large piece that goes here will win the game, right? Because these are all large. So I could drag a large piece and we'll see that yellow won the game because of the size. But here's the kicker. You give your opponent the piece that they're going to play. So you don't get to choose what piece you get to play. You choose what your opponent gets to play. So whenever you lose the game, it's because you gave your opponent the piece that won the game. So it's a super it's a very fun pattern recognition type of game. But this is a very interesting case for widgets because you'll notice each piece, I'm going to reset the game here. Each piece is a widget. So what you can do is clone, like the widget can clone itself with different state values. So I can bring in a board here and delete all of the pieces for it. And when I hit reset, doink, when I hit reset, what it's going to do is it's going to clone itself. So the same widget code is running. It's going to clone itself and say, except instead of being a board, be a piece. And so now this board is now aware of 12 other instances of the widget. So if I copy a bunch of these over here and I hit sync, it's going to clean it up and be like, no, I can only have 1 piece of every type for me over here. But then I can come over here and I can clone the board and I can hit reset and it'll create a new instance of the game. So the board is constantly managing all of these different instances of the widget. And in order to do that, it needs to know the Figma API stuff that we were looking at, right? Like the X and Y positions and its XY position. Like when I drag a piece right here, it's going to suck it into place to the closest position on the board. And in order to do that, it's doing X and Y and relative positioning, right? But what it's doing is it's moving Figma nodes around, and that's what the widget is doing. So you're not moving things internally in the widget render. You're actually moving instances of widget on the Fig Jam canvas. So it's a fun little example of just how wild you can get, right? This is just using our widget APIs and our plugin APIs to achieve.
But that's pretty complex.
Yeah, it's super complex. Yeah. And I've run into a ton of bugs thinking about it because here's an example. What happens when the user undoes? How are you setting the state so that when that state gets undone, your game doesn't break, right? Or here's a fun example. What if a user selects 4 things and drags them on the board? Is your game logic relying on 1 piece to be moved, or can it adapt when 4 pieces are moved at once? So it's it brings in as a web developer, I've never thought about a lot of this stuff, right? Here's a bug. So it detected it correctly, but it also keeps rejecting that piece. So yeah, I still have things to work out, but there's a piece there, so it won't let me move a piece there. Anyway, these are all examples of the wild things you can do with widgets. Here are ones that are in the community right now. This is Raji's simple vote. So people can vote and this will stick. Well, actually, I didn't move this here. Hold on. This is a bug with sticky right now. But basically, so a lot of times you'll have a ton of stickies in your Fig Jam. And so what you can do, and Raji built in awesome functionality to just duplicate this. If I had a ton of stickies, I could duplicate this vote widget onto each one of them. And then as a group, we can all go vote for which ones we want to prioritize or what have you. This is Gavin's table. You can bring in a table and there can be tons of rows in this, tons of columns, whatever you want. And this one's actually interesting. So Gavin has a lot of functionality in this that's closer to what you would expect out of like a Google Sheets. So instead of using input, he's using a UI for the input, for the entry here. So if I hit Command Enter, it moves, or hold on. It looks like that's broken right now. But basically, if I tab around, right? So I can shift tab from cell to cell. There's shortcuts that are built in for like creating new rows. He's got like settings for some keyboard shortcuts. And so that's a great case to use an entire UI as your input there and send the cell updates via post message instead of editing them directly. This is a wild one. So this one we'll see here. We can, Jackie and team built this one, and then boink.
That is so cute.
Polaroid, we can move around. So that's an awesome one to bring in if you have like a team. PG Ghani's Figma is a super cool one. It's a way to create an entire meeting, set time for each thing, and a little emoji if you want. And then it uses the Figma API to run we can't see it right now.
And the timer.
It sets up a timer for you. So it uses the Figma API to do all of that. I'm going to close that. Bursabel and some other folks put together this alignment scale. So you can just be like, I feel great right now. Strongly agree, strongly disagree. You can toss your face on here somewhere. What else? Takesta's got like this awesome markdown notes widget. So Takesta in this case is using an input for search. And then when you are adding a markdown note, I didn't create that one. My other user did. Right. So I could search for something here, and there it is. So that's a fun one. I put together a pie chart here, or a donut chart for ratios of ingredients on some spaghetti. We've got, I don't know if this is accurate in anyone else's opinion, but 35% noodles, 30% sauce, 25% meatballs, 10% cheese. And then
cheese percentage needs to be higher, but I respect it.
Okay, fine. I was just thinking like grated parm. Yeah, I guess maybe we should have a little bit more. Shin's got search and Giphy for stuff. Then Jordan Singer's got this cool little weather chat. Let me refresh it. Chicago is still 54. I don't know. Los Angeles. I couldn't load it. I think I typed it wrong. Anyway, we also have rock, paper, scissors, priority matrix. Anyways, there's a ton of different things you can do. This is actually like the most intense graphing thing I've ever seen in my life. Like you can literally bring in JSON format and, so all this stuff in Fig Jam is under this little dude right here. And you could just type in anything, but like simple vote, right? We were talking about that one from Raji. So we can go over to widgets. And here's Roddy's simple vote, and we can just drag it in. Here's the configuration screen for simple vote. But anyway, so widgets are available right there. Plugins are available right here as well if you wanted to run a plugin. Plugins also run in Fig Jam, by the way. Nice. So yeah, that is this is Fig Jam in a nutshell. At least as a developer, the most exciting stuff for me is like I feel like I need to say this more strongly. When you build a widget and you have multiplayer built into it. So if you've ever, like I was saying how like I built this game and I used like Firebase, right? For like to have like a real-time connection between different players, and I synced their, I use a real-time database to sync player inputs and all of that. That comes built in to widgets using the synced, there's a synced map and a synced state. And
that is so nice.
Sync data between people immediately. So if your team is using this stuff, like you could build an entirely functioning multiplayer game as long as it's like relatively straightforward, right? And it's like very step-based and all that. Like you don't need any third parties to do that. You can just build it and bring it in and it works, I've been thinking more and more like Fig Jam, like as a platform for ideas. I've got a bunch that I'm working on that I just have floating around in the back of my mind for like how much of a cool kind of platform Fig Jam is in this sense to run these sorts of things. But yeah, so that is widgets.
No, that's incredible, because I think especially if you were not familiar with Figma and you had kind of written it off as just design software or
Yep.
just for designers, the idea that you could come in and build whatever you wanted in what's
Exactly.
basically a wide open playground.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That is so cool. Seriously, so freaking cool.
Yeah, I and there's the other thing is, like, I also know there's a lot more to come. Like, we're this is just the start of like what we're doing with this stuff. So that in my mind is like super exciting.
Yep. Yeah, I know some stuff. You guys have some announcements coming with config, right? I know
Yeah,
you
there's
can't
going to
probably-
be a lot of cool stuff happening. So May 10th to 11th, free for all. It's international, like speakers from over 20 countries. We're going to have a bunch in office to do the live broadcast, which will be a lot of fun. 100 plus speakers, 65 sessions. It's just going to be a lot of fun. It's 24 hours. So we're going to be streaming all day and all night. And it's going to be a lot of fun. I don't have any like recommendations outside of the 7 people that I've been working with. So all the advocates have been working closely with 7 or 8 folks that are giving presentations. So these are the ones I'm most excited about with, because they're the only ones I know details about. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of cool stuff there, and it's not just going to be for designers. And if you're a developer, like, Figma is very much invested in being a useful thing for developers and speaking to that community that's already there, as well as the people that are new and hearing about this for the first time or just getting their feet wet. I know a lot of times, like, when you work for a company, you're kind of just doing whatever they do, right? You're using their tools. And so a lot of times you don't really feel like you have a decision in like what you get to use, right? Especially if you're like deciding between like a whiteboard solution or, you know, any of that stuff. But there's a ton of cool, awesome stuff with Figma. And if your design team's using it, there's an extensibility platform for you to go and maybe, you know, offer them some cool things that they didn't know were possible. And yeah, super exciting.
Yeah, and I mean, for anyone, you guys definitely have like paid group plans and stuff, but anyone can go make a Figma account and fiddle around. That's free, right?
Yep. We've been using my personal account for this, right? You can do all sorts of cool stuff.
If developers or anyone have questions, what's the best way for folks to get at you or pick your brain on stuff or see what cool stuff you're working on?
I'm going to bring it back, the developer Slack, and I'm going to get a link for that right now. You can literally DM me on the developer Slack whenever you want. Okay.
And chat, now's your chance too. If there was anything, if there are questions y'all have been sitting on.
Yeah, sorry.
Throw them in.
I've just been going.
No, it's been crazy good information. It's stuff that, like, I mean, I would not consider myself new to Figma, right? Especially design side. I've been using it for ages. I had no idea so much of this, because so much of it has been me using it individually as a designer. And so to be able to, this was a really cool look at something that I thought I knew, and I was proven deeply wrong.
Well, I mean, I felt the exact same way, like, when I started working here. Like, I used Figma. Like, our design team used Figma, and we were doing, you know, and I was like, oh, this is super cool, because like it's facilitated like our design to development conversation really, really, really well. And then I like started learning about what the community was doing once I started working here. It's like, oh my gosh, like this is incredible. Like this is like something I can play with, you know? So yeah, it's super exciting.
Oh, sorry. I just saw that you threw that link.
Yeah, that's the Slack invite.
All right. So for anyone looking to jump in, this is the Figma plugins Slack.
It's a very long, disgusting link.
Yeah, they should be able to just click it in the chat. But just in case anyone's watching this
Later.
VOD later, like to throw them up here. So yeah, take a screenshot, type it all out. You can do it. I believe in you. But yeah, no, that was seriously an amazing rundown. I'm trying to think if there's anything. I think that covered. I'm looking at like my list of questions that I had for you, and you like slammed through all of them. It was fantastic.
All right, cool.
Was there anything else that you wanted to call out or hype up or whatever before we wrap things up?
Nothing in particular, just that like we're really focused on what developers need, right? And like we're very interested in hearing like the problems that need solving, especially when we think about just like the evolution of product development and like what it means to, you know, code like 10 years from now, right? Like, and also what do you need today? And like, what ideas do you have out there? I mean, I would encourage you, like, if you have opinions and needs in this space, like reach out, like we'd love to hear about it. So, I was pleasantly surprised, like just how invested Figma is in the developer conversation. So,
that is awesome. And you're the first
developer
advocate,
advocate. Right? I'm sure not the last. We aren't hiring yet, but yeah.
No, I just thought that was so cool because Figma has historically had a bunch of design advocates, which makes total sense.
We've got an awesome team. I'm a little biased, but I think it's my favorite team at Figma.
That's fantastic. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This was super cool, genuinely.
Absolutely. It was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm gonna have to check out some of these UI Mondays.
Yeah.
This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's the world's widest topic, so we could bring on anything and anyone vaguely related to UI and just chat about whatever we want. Me and my coworker Alyssa do the show, and we alternate weeks.
Awesome.
So yeah, we've had a couple weeks focused on Figma, more on our side, Figma Kits and some of the stuff we do. So to top it off with this like super deep dive on Figma for developers was fantastic. Perfect.
Awesome. That makes me really happy. All right, cool. Well, here's to it.
Yeah, sorry. That one last chat in the comment got me. Like, yep.
Well, here's to a good week. Hope everyone has a good week. And thanks again. Super excited to be here.
For sure. And thanks y'all for tuning in. We will be here every Monday, 2 p.m. Eastern time, UI Mondays. Thanks for tuning in.
See you, everyone.
Catch you later.